artistic photos. Is this a YouTube job?
Exactly.
Camden ขายของกระตุกกระติกตลาดนัดCamden ตลาดCamden
They built this network of liquid highways. They go all over the country. The Grand Union coming down from the north, we're right at the end of it. Now if we turned the boat around, took you back along the Grand Union Canal behind us, eventually, going past Birmingham, we can take you to York, Liverpool, Manchester, Wales, Oxford, Bristol, Bath, from here. And I'll give you an idea of how long that would take. Notice how fast we're travelling. If we were to take you to Birmingham, the other end of the Grand Union, but we go by road, we would be there this afternoon. If we take you to Birmingham, but we go by canal, we will be there in about 2 weeks' time. It's a very, very slow form of transport. Now, as we're moving along, I'll keep talking about the history and you'll realise exactly why the canals are so slow. But look on the right hand side now, we've got an island. It's called Browning's Island. It's named after Robert Browning, famous English poet who lived in the area back in the 19th century. The island is now a little nesting area for the local birds. As you saw, the Canada geese have got youngsters, the swans have got little ones. And as we go past the island and you keep looking to the right, you can see where the last bit of the Grand Union Canal goes. Now it comes into London, it comes down to London from the north, into London from the west, off there to the right. After a short distance, just after Paddington Station, it stops. And the Grand Union Canal opened here in London in 1801 as the main industrial highway coming down to the north. The Regent Canal begins at this bridge in front of us and it joins up with the Grand Union. The Regent's Canal from here goes across North London and it drops down to Limehouse Docks on the River Thames. Not only does it join the River Thames, it joins another set of canals that takes it up into Hertfordshire. So we're now on the Regent's Canal, and look on the left side, this pathway is for horses, and there's always a path along one side of the canal. It's called the tow path, and that's short for towing pathway. Horses walking along the tow path pulling the boats, because canals were built before engines were invented. Horses pulled the boats. The house on our left is where payment was made back in the old days. We call these toll houses. You might see lock keepers' cottages along the canals. Most of those are private homes now because the canals have changed. They were built only for industry, horses pulling the boats, carrying heavy items, and then engines, road and railway transport took over. We still use the canals a little bit for industry, but mostly we live on the canals and we use them for pleasure. Have a look around you at our boats. Most of the boats you can see are permanent homes for the people who are living inside. And look at the shape of our boats. And you'll notice that the standard English canal boat is a long and narrow shape. Narrow is the important part of that bit. Now, the canal that we're on here is very wide. And not a lot of our canals are really, really narrow. And the boats, of course, are built to fit narrow canals. Anything wider than this boat or the ones around us would not be able to fit on all of the canals. So the boats are built narrow, they've got to fit narrow canals, narrow locks, narrow tunnels, and they're called narrowboats. There's a very common mistake that we hear all the time, people calling our boats barges. Even the BBC get it wrong. They're called narrowboats, and the ones you're looking at are modern. They've been built as homes for people to live in. Now, a proper working narrowboat would, of course, carry cargo. A proper working narrowboat, you're sitting inside now. Most of the boat would be a big storage area of cargo, and at the back of a working narrowboat there will be a very, very small cabin where the family would have to live. Looking at the modern boats each side, you can see we can use all of the boat today as a home. We've got plenty of room. In our kitchens we've got bottled gas, colour gas for cooking, coal and wood stoves to keep warm, water tanks with fresh water for showers and toilets, another little group of Canada geese, bless them. We've got water tanks with fresh water on board. We've got toilets, of course. Toilets are not emptied into the canals. There are pump-out stations and services for that. We have engines now instead of a horse, and engines make electricity. All of those modern electric items that you've got at home, we can have in our boats. But we can undo our ropes, we can travel, we can take our homes with us. And there's more than 23,000 of us living on the canals. But the boats you're looking at are modern, and none of them were on the canal back in the old days. Now the boat you're sitting inside, this is a proper working boat. You're in a boat, and it's called Jason. And Jason's Trip is named after this boat. Jason was built in 1906, pulled by a horse. Yeah, you're in an old horse-pulled working boat. You, by the way, are sitting in the cargo hold, and behind me, at the back of the boat, is the cabin where the family used to live. And if you remember looking at the boat before you got inside, you would have seen a cabin. Do you remember? Yeah, only half of that cabin was for a whole family to live in. This is an iron and wood composite build. Not many boats like this are left. There are quite a lot of old boats still on the canals, but Jason is now 115 years old, and it's one of the oldest, and still working. And we don't own this boat, we don't own the company, we just work it. But we're very proud to look after such a beautiful historic boat. And of course we don't have a horse pulling Jason along anymore, we've got an engine. And we're going to go through a tunnel. Ahead of us is a hill, the canal goes through it. The tunnel is 272 yards long. There is no path in the tunnel for horses to walk and pull the boats. Now I'm going to explain something, it's a little difficult to understand, so you'll need to listen carefully. The horse would be on the towpath, which is on the left side. Those boats weren't here back in those days. Before the tunnel entrance, the towpath stops. The horse was untied from the boat, and someone would walk the horse over the hill. They would be waiting for the boat at the other end, and then two people on the front of the boat, lying down, one on each side, lying on their backs with their legs outwards, could push along the side walls of the tunnel with their feet to keep the boat moving. And it was called legging a boat through a tunnel. Now all tunnels are different, and they're different lengths, and they're different heights, and they're different widths. And when we get in there, you'll see that it's too wide for me to reach the side walls with my feet. So for this tunnel, they put a plank of wood across the front of the boat first, and that plank of wood stuck out each side, and the two people legging the boat would lie on that. Because we have so few people on board these days, I can do something that I'm never used to do. I can come and show you a picture. Did you see this before? Not yet. Okay. So your friend might want to have a look at this before she goes in. See that there? That's the tunnel that we're going through. And they're lying. This is the tunnel we're going through now. The two people pushing it along the side walls. This picture shows them doing it somewhere else. This one, this is the tunnel we're going through now. One person each side, that is one, pushing the boat through along the side. Leg a boat through a tunnel. This is only 272 yards long. There are tunnels that are nearly 2 miles long. They get to the end of the tunnel, they would stop legging the boat. There would often be people who would wait at the entrance of tunnels just to leg boats through, and they were paid for that. If there were boats waiting at this end, they could leg them the other way. The horse would be standing on the towpath waiting for them. They'd continue with 1 horsepower, and 1 horse is all you need to pull a boat like Jason. We can put 30 tons in here. The boat weighs 20 tons without anything in it, and I can pull this boat on my own. So could you. It's the water taking the weight, doing most of the work for you. But of course engines were invented. Road and railway transport was much faster than this. The canals could not compete financially with road and railway transport, so they stopped using them, and they started to fill them in, and we nearly lost them. Over the years, a lot of canals have been reopened, and we can still see rope marks on the older bridges where horses' ropes kept rubbing into the edges of the bridges. Now I'm going to show you rope marks, but you guys need to look at the bridge ahead of us right now, and I'm going to tell you where to look when we get there. Look at the bridge, follow the arch to the left side. When we get there, look at the edge of the bridge from the white paint down to the ground. There's a bit of metal embedded in the brickwork with smooth grooves, which are rope marks, from where horses' ropes constantly rubbed into the edge. And there are rope marks at the other end of the bridge as well. So those railings and the gate were not here back in the old days. The horse was 20 yards ahead of us. It would have gone out of the bridge by now, around to the left, and the rope dragging and rubbing into the left edge of the bridge. With hundreds of boats pulled by horses over the years, we can still see these rope marks. So coming out, look at the left corner of the bridge. Now at this end, start from the ground where there's a bit of green foliage, and from the ground up for about 3 feet in the edge of the bridge, bit of metal, rope marks on it. We'll see more of them before we get to Camden. You'll see them on all of the older bridges along the canals. And although engines were being put into boats as early as 1911, they carried on using horses. Now they were still using horses along this canal up to 1956. 1956 they were still using horses along this canal. Now, as the canals were built for industry, factories were built along the canals. If you look up on the left side, there's a power station, and it was built here so coal could be brought by canal, and then the coal was burnt in furnaces to make electricity. We don't do that in our cities anymore because of pollution. That power station has become a storage power station, and behind that power station is a famous cricket ground called Lord's. Lord's is not where it used to be. Lord's cricket ground used to be here, where we are now. They had to move it when they built the Regent's Canal. Now the boats on the left, you know now that they're called narrowboats. You can see they're modern, and again they are people's homes, and we can travel whenever we want in our boats. If you pay rent to keep your boat on a space like these people do, nobody can take your space when you go away. When you're travelling on your boat, you want to stop somewhere different, you must look for visitor moorings, but you can only stay on those for short amounts of time, and then you have to keep moving on. Now look at the wall behind the boats. Keep looking left, look at the wall, and now keep looking at it, and eventually you will see arch-shaped markings where there were tunnels along that wall. They've been bricked up now, they're no longer used, but that's where they would have unloaded coal from their boats into the power station. The empty boats took away the waste from the burnt coal, the ash and clinker. It was recycled for brickmaking and road surfacing. Almost everything back in those days could be recycled. How the world has changed, eh? In the last of the tunnels behind these construction boats, they kept horses. They kept 200 horses over there. And the boating families, most of them didn't own a horse. They hired them as they moved along. Part of Camden Market is where they kept horses, now called the Stables Market. By the way, these guys here, they're doing some major repair work on the tow path. Now, most of those boats have actually shuffled up into the middle of their moorings. They would normally be here because these guys need to mend the tow path that is behind them. It's quite a big job, and it's been a long time waiting for that to be done. So the families lived in the little cabin at the back of the boat. The cabin no bigger than a cupboard. No modern comforts as we have today. They had babies and children with them. Children on the canals back in those days started work at about 4 or 5 years old. And they were always on the move, so there was no chance for canal children to go to school. No school for them, no reading or writing, even into the 1960s, a lot of canal families could still not read or write. I have friends who still carry cargo on old working boats, by the way, and they live in a little cabin at the back, and they're still doing it just as they did in the old days. But going back 200 years, let's talk about what they carried on the canals. Everything went by canal. These were the main highways. Everything we put on road or railway would have gone by canal. That includes timber, bricks, cement and building materials, which are in fact still carried. The coal of the power stations, tar, waste products, fruit and vegetables from farms going into the towns, raw materials, grain, iron ore, limestone, clay, going to the potteries. There were things coming from all over the world, brought by ships into our ports, then put onto canal boats and taken to factories for processing, like tea, coffee, spices from the east, paper, cotton, rubber, fruit pulp going to the fruit juice factories, cocoa powder, sugar cane going to the chocolate factories, blocks of ice that we imported from Norway before we had fridges, military items during different wars, and it was after the Second World War that canals went into decline. In the early 1960s, the canals were shut down and the canal people lost their way of life. Boats like Jason were scrapped and they started to fill the canals in. And then things changed. It was the canal people. And the gentleman who actually started Jason's trip back in 1951 was one of those people who changed things. A gentleman called John James, he saved this boat Jason from being scrapped. He had a novel idea to put chairs in the cargo hold, build a little roof over it to keep you dry, and he started the very first canal passenger trip company in London 70 years ago. I mean, see that little cabin on his tug? That is about the same size as a boatman's cabin for a whole family, by the way. So it started, John James started this trip boat, other people did the same. People started turning old boats into homes, then they started building new boats to live on, opening canals that had been filled in. Slowly the canals have been coming back, 2,000 miles open, boatyards building new boats. Unfortunately, in the last 2 or 3 years, all of us down here on the canal have noticed something. The canals are in decline. We're going to lose them, and it could be less than 10, 15 years time, probably less than 10 years. We will not be able to do this anymore, and they're declining quite quickly, which is an absolute shame. By the way, this boat coming past is our rival company, the London Water Bus. Now that is an older boat turned into a passenger boat, not as old as Jason. So their passenger area has been windowed and stuff, but it's the cargo hold. That's Callum at the back, giving a little wave. Half of that cabin was for the family, half of it. Nowhere near as old as Jason, nowhere near as pretty either. I might be a bit biased. Now have a look up on the right hand side, we've got some big mansion houses. They're on the north side of Regent Park. Now we can see this one very clearly, and then the other ones are behind the trees, but there is one more that we'll see more clearly. These are new houses. They've been built more than 100 years after the rest of Regent's Park. The park itself, built in the early 1800s, designed by John Nash, famous architect at the time. He designed Regent Street and Regent's Park and Clarence House and parts of Buckingham Palace. He designed Brighton Pavilion as well. John Nash did not design those, they're new houses. Quentin Terry designed them. They're designed to look a bit like the older John Nash houses. Now there is one at the far end, round the corner, that we can see more clearly. But let's look at this beautiful private garden on the left, one of the largest in central London, goes all the way to the next bridge. Now if you walk around the streets in London, you can't see these gardens, they're behind brick walls. If you were walking along Prince Albert Road up there on the left, you wouldn't see the garden, it's behind a brick wall. Down here on the canal, we can look at it every single day. We can't see the house that goes with it, it's hidden from view. But the buildings you can see up there, it's a block of flats in St John's Wood. It doesn't actually have anything to do with the garden. This garden is stunning in the autumn time, by the way. As we come around the corner, up on the right hand side again, we've got the last one of the new houses. The Regency Villa. Regent's Canal, Regency Villa. That's 16 years old. How much do you think that would cost? 10 million. I think a bit more than that. Now over the years, I've been sort of keeping an eye on costs, and they've been going up from 30 to 40 to 50 million. Last year, get this, one of them sold for 130 million for a house. Yeah, I did actually. And that one. For a house, I mean, we do wonder why the world is going mad. But anyway, down here on the old Regent's Canal, this is man-made. Every canal in the world is man-made. In this country, it was mostly Irish migrants who built them. 200 years ago, they didn't have machinery like we have today, but they built 4,000 miles of canals by hand, digging them out, making locks, tunnels, aqueducts, with nothing more than shovels and pickaxes. An amazing achievement of engineering, and the Irish workers were known as navigation engineers, shortened to the word navvy that we use even today for people who build and maintain highways. Today, Canal and River Trust are supposed to look after them. They're not natural waterways, they need a lot of maintenance. This is less than 6 feet deep. Unfortunately, people throw a lot of rubbish into our canals. What you can't see down there will be supermarket trolleys, car tyres, stolen motorbikes, bicycles by the thousand, fridges, cookers, mattresses, and everything else you can think of, all causing damage to boats and wildlife. It is supposed to be cleared out. Canal and River Trust have not been doing their job very well. The water has to be put in. It's not natural, so it must be pumped in from rivers and reservoirs. If it is not put in, and if you look at the edge on the towpath, we've already lost about 5 inches of water in the last few days. And if that keeps going down and they don't top it up, we won't be able to do what we're doing. Canal and River Trust are not doing their job, and that's another reason why we can see them in decline. Okay, up ahead we have the most famous bridge on the Regent's Canal. It's called a Macclesfield Bridge. No one calls it Macclesfield Bridge. We call it something else because something happened to it. Now, back in 1874, there was a boat coming along here. Part of the cargo was gunpowder. That exploded as they went underneath, and the whole bridge came down. Now look at the column on the left, the first one. Down the bottom, can you see there are road marks? And the last column on the left, down the bottom of it, you can see little road marks. Now those road marks are in the wrong place. Those 2 columns were turned around before they rebuilt the top of the bridge, and they've now got road marks on both sides, which should be impossible unless something had happened to the bridge. The explosion was an accident. It was heard right across London. The boatmen were killed, and because this was the main highway at the time, they had to rebuild it as quickly as possible. They managed to rebuild Macclesfield Bridge in just a few days. And ever since that accident, everyone knows it as blow up. And these guys here are doing something that we call magnet fishing. And again, this goes back to Canal and River Trust not doing their job properly. These guys, they sort of throw a very strong magnet into the water on a bit of rope, and they trawl out all of the metal objects. And they're trying to make a point. They're trying to make a point that it's Canal and River Trust who should be doing that, but they're not doing it. Canal and River Trust, interestingly, are trying to make it illegal for people to do that. Back in the day when they closed the canals in the 1960s, people tried to keep the canals open. The government at the time made it illegal for people to take rubbish out of the canals. Unbelievable, we're going back in time. Have a good look around you, everybody. Remember where you are? Central London. You could walk to... Yeah. Hang on a minute. Oh, got Regent's Park on the right hand side, but you could walk to Oxford Street in less than 20 minutes. There's a main road just a few yards away, and just think about how many miles around us, 30, 40 miles around us. We've got buildings, houses, streets, traffic. We're travelling at top speed, we're looking at wildlife, we're right in the heart of London. A little bit beautiful, isn't it? Now the bluebells have just finished, but a lot of the the water birds are hatching chicks. We don't see horses on the towpath anymore. Remember, that was only built for horses, but we can use them for walking, jogging, fishing. Lots of fish, by the way, down there. We're coming into London Zoo. We're not going to see much from down here. The enclosure on the right has 2 warthogs living in there. Now, unless they're walking around, we won't be able to see them. And the next enclosure on the right has a family of African hunting dogs. We may or may not see them. There's one of the warthogs. Warthogs are an African bush pig. Now, the African hunting dogs in this one, these, if we do see them, they're beautiful dogs. They're tortoiseshell colour. They're quite big. Out in Africa, they have become very rare. People have shot them, poisoned them, taken their habitat. They have to breed them in zoos now to stop them becoming extinct in the wild. Well done, human beings. The London Zoo itself is one of the oldest in the world. 1828 it first opened. It's a very important institution today for conservation and education. A lot of animals are on international breeding programs. By the way, this structure on the other side is under renovation. Snowdon Aviary, built in the early 60s, designed by the Queen's brother-in-law, Lord Snowdon. People didn't like it when it was first built. It was too modern looking, but it's become a Grade 2 listed building. It has also become useless as an aviary because they can't mend it properly. But they've made it a Grade 2 listed building. They can't pull it down. They're redesigning it into some kind of primate enclosure over the next year, but all of the building work has been held up for a year because of COVID. And poor old London Zoo are in serious financial difficulty. Well, we all are, but London Zoo is important, and if you want to help them out, donate some money, go and visit them. Go to Whipsnade, they are open again now. On the right, there's a blue sign on the fence. It's got a picture of one of the hunting dogs on there. Now, I mentioned we were travelling at top speed. It's a hectic life, isn't it? We're not allowed to go any faster than this, 4 miles an hour. You really can walk faster than a canal boat travels, but you can't carry 30 tonnes with you while you're doing it. Now, we've got Marcus driving the boat. Do you know where the driver is, by the way? At the back, good. You steer from the back. We've got Marcus with us today. To see where he's going, he's looking across the roof above your heads, and he's going to have to slow down any moment now, and he'll go right down to about 1 or 2 miles an hour. He can see that there are boats ahead, and they're moored on the right where people live. So notice he's slowed down now. When we see boats that are moored or tied up, we've got to come down to this speed, because if we were still doing 4 miles an hour, those boats would start to rock about, we could damage them, we'd break their ropes, we would be very, very unpopular. And if you want to travel on the canals, you can hire narrowboats for holidays. This is the speed you will be travelling at for quite a lot of the time. Now, there are locks to get through, they take time, they were always there, but there's a lot more narrowboats on the canals now, moored up like this, so we have to slow down for them. And the other thing that's slowing the canals down are people putting all sorts of vessels on the canals, inflatables and paddleboards, and there's a lot of stuff coming onto the canal, and they're unlicensed, they're not supervised, and they're incredibly dangerous. These boats, again, these are paying rent to keep their boats here. They can move around when they want to, but nobody can take their space when they go away. Now, if you look ahead, you'll see the top of a Chinese-style building, and it's a floating Chinese restaurant. And the Regent's Canal turns to the left, and we follow it to the left. We can't take you straight on. We can't take you straight on because the canal that should be there has gone. Now, some of you may or may not live in London. Did you realise that there was another canal that went straight on from here to King's Cross? He's sounding the horn because this is a blind bend for us. There was a canal, it went from here to King's Cross. There was a big fruit and vegetable market up there. There was a depot where they kept feed for horses. There were hundreds of horses around. And of course the canal was the supply route. And then after the war, not using canals anymore, they started just dumping rubbish in it. Then they started dumping rubble from bomb buildings. Look over to the right as we go around the corner. They started filling it in, they built over it with houses and streets. Over there on the right, no more canal, just a dead end. There's the Feng Shang Princess, the floating Chinese restaurant. And we've turned into the Primrose Hill area. Church on our left side, St Mark's Church of Primrose Hill. Primrose Hill is behind it. You can walk to the top of Primrose Hill, about 10 minutes from Camden, and get one of the most beautiful views across London. Now the little bridge we're going under here, I'm going back to rope marks. Where would you look for rope marks? Towpath side, yep, where the horse walks. So look at the left edges of the bridge. If you can see through the graffiti, you see there's a strip of metal on each corner, and the rope marks are on those. And the strips of metal were put onto the bridges as protection. And those ropes would eventually wear all the way through those strips of metal. Then they just replaced the strip of metal, and they didn't have to repair all the brickwork. And along this little section here, we've got visitor moorings. Now the boats that are moored on the left side, the boats that are moored on the left, all of those boats are on the move, they're travelling, they're using visitor spaces. So the boats on our left side, once they've arrived here, a certain amount of time they can stay, then they've got to move on. Two different sides to the canals. The nest on our right hand side of a coot nest. Now there's a couple of coot nests along here, they've both had chicks recently. So two different sides to the canals. The towpath for horses is usually on one side only. Now there's no need for the towpath to be on both sides. The opposite side is called the off side, and that's usually private property with no pathway for horses. And some very attractive gardens along here on the off side, and very expensive houses. Not as expensive as the ones in Regent's Park, but a few £1 million each. So we're getting very close to Camden now. A few more people around on the towpath. A lot more graffiti. You see all the graffiti along the walls on the left side. Now this has been building up and building up and building up. Normally graffiti is cleaned off, but it's very, very expensive, takes time, and it's not been a priority in the last year. So what we're now finding is that graffiti is on painting on painting on painting on painting. And we've got some more bridges before we get to Camden. The one right above us carries a road, but the next two, if you look at them, they're square shaped. That tells us they're carrying railway lines. Now the railway line up above is going to and from Euston Station. The railway line up above was definitely not here when the canal was built. They hadn't invented them at the time. We went under some other railway lines just past the power station. They were going to and from Marylebone Station and one of the metropolitan lines. And again, not there when the canal was built. And there's a building just ahead called the Pirate Castle. It's a youth club. It was built in the early 70s. The children at the time helped raise the money to build it. There are two boats on our right side. Now one of those, the one on the other side, the far side, was actually designed by them and built for them a few years ago, and they've got wheelchair access. They do a lot of work with special needs people. Kayaks and canoes over there. Now what I said earlier about people putting all sorts of unsuitable vessels on the canals, these guys are an organised activity group, and when they come out, we saw a few of them back in the zoo, they keep right out of our way, they're supervised, they're safe, they've got somebody with them, and that's okay, that's fine, but please don't put your own inflatable or whatever vessel on the canal. It is just too dangerous. And now we arrive in Camden. Now we've got factories on both sides. If you look on the right, the big old white building on the right, yeah. Ooh, activity going on down here. There you go, these are two coons having a little fight. Bless them. They really don't like each other. So we've got the white building on the right, we've got a brick building on the left, both of them owned by a company called Gilbey's, famous for making gin. Lots of other industries here, but engines came. Road and railway transport took over, and slowly the industries moved away. The factories have been turned into flats, offices, studios. Camden is now famous for the markets. We're going to be stopping here, but the Regent's Canal does not. And it's got another 6 miles before it gets down to the next set of canals and the River Thames. And from here, the canal starts to drop. Now, if you're looking straight ahead on the canal, you'll see a bridge. And that bridge was built for horses to get across, not for people. Just after the horse bridge, look ahead on the canal, there are gates. They're lock gates. The canal drops 85 feet over 6 miles. 12 locks carry the canal down to the river or back up to here. By the way, that tunnel on the left, same as the ones by the power station, this one has not been bricked up, it's still been used. So when I try and explain what canals are, think of canals as liquid highways. Think of locks as liquid staircases. Now we're not going down through the locks, we don't have time. By the way, what we're going to do right now, we're going to turn the boat round. Have you thought about whether we could have turned the boat around any time between here and Little Venice? No, you can't turn a 72-foot boat around in the canal. We have just enough room here. When you turn a boat round, you say you're winding it, and this is called winding. Now, if you look immediately over to the left, you see that man walking up to the bridge, and you see the people walking down from the bridge. Man with a white t-shirt, yeah? Can you see horizontal cut marks in the brickwork next to where he's walking? Yes? Road marks, all road marks, and on the other lock up with water, and that boat will slowly rise up to this level. And you can go and watch them doing that. But if I could just have your attention, because I think for most of you, this is the end of your journey, Camden Market. As you can see, you're a little bit busy. If you are still concerned about COVID situations, I would suggest you wear your face coverings when you're walking around Camden. There's not a lot of social distancing going on. A lot of it is now reopening. There are 2 underground stations just 5 minutes away. There's bars, there's cafes, there's food stalls. Go and find the stables market where they used to keep the horses. Go and watch boats going up and down the locks. And of course, if you are going around Camden, always be careful with your bags and your possessions. Now, as we come alongside the tow path, I'm going to jump off and tie the boat up. You guys stay where you are for a moment, as this can be a little bit tricky. Before I jump off the boat and get it tied up, I would like to say thank you, everyone, for coming with us this afternoon. We are slowly making, well, we're not making any money, we lost some a lot last year, but we're slowly getting back to something. So you are all very welcome to come and see us again. You can tell your friends to come and see us. People keep saying to us, why don't we use social media? But we're so old-fashioned down here. We're going to do it the old-fashioned way, and word of mouth. So I said, if you tell your friends, whatever, if they'd like to come along, and thank you very much.